I am not a person. I am a slit in winter, thin as a razor, cold as a confession that never left the tongue. I am the tent cloth torn from the inside. That night I felt nails scour my body, leaving a frantic seam that never learned to heal. I watched footprints bloom and vanish, 10 pale ovals sprinting away from the lamp's halo, as if fleeing a word no one dares pronounce. 1, 2, there were 9 names. 1 hill, and a night shaped like a bottomless box. And I a scrap of fabric, the only witness that kept its shape. If you want this story, step in with me. But keep quiet. At Dyatlov, sound is the first thing that betrays you. They were students and veterans of winter roads, hands that could read weather by smell, calves that could measure slope without numbers. An expedition across the Urals in midwinter. A tent pitched on the shoulder of Kholat Syakhl, the hill the Mansi call the Mountain of the Dead. That night, the snow said nothing. The wind said nothing. Only tent fabric was ripped open, an emergency door cut toward the dark. From the tent, searchers followed bare tracks toward a stand of gaunt pines. Beneath the branches, a clumsy fire, and 2 bodies cooling like a prayer cut short. The others lay scattered, from the slope to a black ravine. Some in warm clothes, for 6, some dressed in fear alone. One question still warm today: what did they run from? Here is Igor, the leader, eyes fixed on a path like a man reading a score. Here is Zina, warm smile, heavy coat, jotting jokes about wind and porridge. Here is Luda, hair tucked beneath wool, walking steady. Here is Rustam, Kolya, Sasha, Semyon, and 2 Yuris, hands that always invited fire. Before winter swallowed them, they left photographs, faces flushed with cold, fat hands cupping a pot. Pictures don't lie, they merely stop, exactly where tragedy begins. We continue. Into the night, where weather writes letters with wind. They raised the tent before the day dissolved into fog. On a slanted plain that did not care for company, where the snow slid like a silent blade. The fabric was pulled taut, so taut, each ice grain that struck me clicked like Morse from the climate. Inside, breath beating on my ceiling, the stove's weak glow, voices rustling like dry leaves warmed in a pan. Then something happened. A whining tension like rope suddenly yanked. Feet stumbling. A hand found a knife. The first cut raced through me like a blocked breath. They poured into the night, barefoot, on instinct, chased by a shapeless thing with a very clear outline. Under the pine, a small fire started like an apology. 2 bodies remained, souls smoked, skin trading warmth for clumsy burns. The trunk showed scrapes, a desperate ladder carved by fingernails, as if they'd tried to climb high enough to see the tent. Me, stretched flat in the wind, mouth of my wound open and unstaunched. From the pine, fate's thread split 3 ways. 1 path back toward the tent, 1 along the slope, 1 down into the ravine. Down there, darkness has water. It washes away footsteps, keeps what cannot run. 4 tried to shelter, harvesting clothes from the fallen, sharing warmth stitch by stitch. When searchers found them, ribs spoke instead of mouths, vaults of bone spoke instead of eyes. impacts without matching surface bruises, as if some giant hand had squeezed from within. And a tongue, this line is not for the faint, was gone with other soft pieces of the face. Cold water is a surgeon without emotion. It takes cleanly and leaves no note. Now the hypotheses arrive, trading hats beneath a single lamp. Some say it was a slab avalanche, not the thunder of a full collapse, but a stealth blade. Quick, heavy, persuasive. If a slab smothered part of the tent, poles leaning, stove still warm. Cutting out is the reflex of lungs deciding to live. Others whisper katabatic wind. Cold air sliding downhill like a creature without outline. Point 6, relentless and orderly, sweeping fear into a tidy pile. Some explanations wear uniforms. Tests, parachute mines, lights in the sky, a low thunder of man-made weather. And some are invisible structures, infrasound. Frequencies the ear ignores, but the heart remembers with its panic. There are simpler masks too. Stove smoke, CO, or a plain accident stripped of romance. Yet dressed anyway, each theory still stands outside the tent, peering through the mouth of my wound. In their packs were diaries. Daily lines so ordinary you'd never suspect death walking outside the canvas. There are jokes, schedules, fatigue, dark bread. No omen. The last frames on film show a lantern's bloom, snow over face and fabric, a curious flare that fuels arguments to this day. Photographs don't lie. They simply stop. Like they did. A click, a before, and silence. Imagine you're on your back in a tent, wind humming like strings over-tightened. A pitch rises, not wind, not exactly. Something heavy sliding on snow above you. Poles shudder, the load grows by an inch. A shadow glides across my ceiling. Or only a trick of the stove light. Someone shouts. Steel flashes. The cut races through me like lightning. They rush into the cold, intending to return once they can breathe. But wind, distance, and the mathematics of heat co-sign the fatal document. Perhaps the only murderer here was physics. Reports speak of shattered ribs, of massive internal force without matching external bruise. Point 6 of missing eyes, of a missing tongue. Water, scavengers, ice, time, each a cold examiner. Whispers mention strange stains, traces that refuse to dine with logic. But the night does not answer in our grammar. It answers in snow. Snow, is expert at burying the bodies of sentences. The Mansi called this hill dead, not to scare, to remind. The name is older than canvas, older than our lab-coded theories. Toponyms don't kill. They simply predict what we forget. Nature never signed our insurance policy. 1.2, here, pause. 0.5, the only faith worth keeping is in the cold. There are tones too low for ears, but not for the heart. Wind pressing across shape can engineer frequencies where panic grows legs, and shadows get hands, and reason wears a thin quilt. Picture a glance in the tent. Eyes meet eyes, and a together chooses an unreasonable act. Flee. Unreasonable in daylight. 0.6. Reasonable in a song you can't hear. It is only another shadow passing the lamp. A slab needs no roar. Point 8. It needs the right angle, moment, and measure. Pressure enough to crack ribs to bend a tent like the chest of someone short of air. For a few seconds, all you need is an exit. Knife, rip, snow, and people part. Outside, they think they'll loop back after checking the slope. But wind becomes a gatekeeper, temperature a lawyer for death. The rest is algebra: distance, temperature, time, clothing. No distress call. No hotline to a generous God. Only them passing along their last scraps of heat. 1.2. You can fault someone's choice. But a blind night. At a 0.6, a knife-edged wind and bodies like candles burnt low. Those are conditions designed so every decision arrives one beat late. And here, a single beat is enough to write a will. A coat hook says, "I shrank with cold." A lace says, "I was untied by numb fingers." A strip of film says, "I saw a flare that the living will debate forever." And I, the tent cloth, I say, I was cut from the inside. My testimony validates survival instinct and invites every nightmare. Sometimes truth and nightmare share a coat. Rise, look down. The tent a trembling dot, the pine line a black fence, bear tracks like a rosary dropped in the snow. It is a perfect set for a noir narrator. Everything in place, except the answer. Where does the shot end? Wherever you want it to. If camping trips had black boxes, they'd record only this: 08 choices elbowing each other inside a few chaotic seconds. Humans excel at survival when time holds still. That night gave them only a handful of breaths. Ice doesn't need volume, it needs timing. They knew how to warm a fire, how to find the pine, how to share clothing. Perhaps some turned back toward the tent. Perhaps some wrapped themselves in a fallen friend's coat, tried to stack their bodies against the wind. But technique has limits. Temperature, distance, luck. That night, luck sent regrets. Dawn came. No one was awake to collect it. What we know. The tent was cut from inside. Tracks led to the forest, 2 by the fire, the rest along the slope and in the ravine. Some injuries imply major internal forces. Soft tissue losses are consistent with time and water snow. No convincing evidence of attack by locals or animals. Horror, no matching clawing on outer surfaces. What we don't know, the exact trigger that made them cut the tent and flee. The precise pathway that produced asymmetric trauma and split the group. What we could test, simulation field. Slab avalanche modeling on a similar slope with a period-accurate tent. Measure load thresholds to cause internal squeeze injuries and pull collapse that forces an emergency exit. Katabatic wind was infrasound modeling across terrain to evaluate panic risk under cold hypoxia, darkness. Stove, smoke, CO scenario. Quantify airway irritation and the seconds to a flight response. Remember, simulations replace reality only after reality has buried its dead. Noir loves villains in wide brim hats, wet streets, and neon signs. Here the villain wore no hat. It was terrain, weather, and a string of small choices, each correct alone, that assembled into a single wrong. If it needs a name, call it the mechanics of accident. And every mechanics obeys laws. Where there is a slope, 0.6, gravity waits. If each had a chance for one last line, perhaps they'd mention the small fire under the pine, the boots left in the tent, the cut nobody wanted but someone had to make. Their final sentence, unwritten, becomes our assignment. Write it with care, with science. Point 6. And with the uncomfortable silence that few can stand. The admission that on certain nights life loses to death by a single breath. Then quiet. I, the tent cloth, still lie on the file's page. My cut is not an answer, but it reminds you that survival sometimes begins by destroying what once sheltered you. You've just listened to an open case. If you carry anything out of this, carry respect for cold and humility before the equations nature writes in wind. This is Dyatlov Pass, the tragedy in the Ural Mountains, where answers may be only a tear in fabric, and questions are as long as winter.